Just went into a courtyard, sat down with them. There was all this kind of incense and stuff sort of floating around. It was, in fact,
The golden age of rock in the 1970s saw Led Zeppelin rise to godlike status. At the peak of their power, stadiums trembled beneath their feet, and millions worshipped their sound. They seemed untouchable, larger than life. But behind the thunderous music and dazzling performances, a darker story unfolded. Inside dressing rooms and recording studios, a silent war brewed, a power struggle that would eventually fracture the heart of the band. For decades, fans idolized the dynamic between Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, the golden-haired, charismatic frontman and the enigmatic, mystical guitar wizard. But what if that partnership was more fragile than anyone imagined? Today, Robert Plant breaks the silence, sending shockwaves through the rock world with revelations of bitterness and conflict that haunted the band from the start. Jimmy Page was the architect of Led Zeppelin, the mastermind behind its signature sound. But Plant, the voice and fire of the group, often felt suffocated beneath Page's domineering presence. Page demanded control, orchestrating every arrangement, layering guitar parts, and crafting the band's sonic identity. Plant was expected to simply plug into Page's grand vision. But he wasn't one to be silenced. He craved creative freedom, yearned to express his own evolving musical tastes, and over time, resentment took root. The tension came to a head during the recording sessions of Asterisk Houses of the Holy Asterisk and Asterisk Physical Graffiti Star. These were no longer collaborative efforts, they were battlegrounds. Plant pushed for more personal lyrics, for a sound that reflected his shifting inspirations. But Page resisted, clinging to the band's mystical, blues-driven origins. Every argument, every compromise, chipped away at their bond. To fans, Plant was a golden-haired demigod. But within the Zeppelin machine, he felt like a second-class citizen. The real power lay with Jimmy Page and manager Peter Grant. Page controlled the set lists, the production, even the band's image. Plant was merely the mouthpiece for Page's genius. Behind the scenes, Plant seethed. He longed to break free, yet every time he asserted himself, he was met with resistance. Even on stage, the imbalance was glaring. Page's guitar solos would stretch endlessly while Plant stood idly, waiting. The rift widened with every performance. Eventually, it became unbearable. And then, tragedy struck. In 1977, Plant's 5-year-old son, Carrick, died suddenly from a stomach virus. The loss hollowed him. Music, once his sanctuary, now felt meaningless. Every lyric, every note, became a cruel reminder of what he had lost. He wanted to disappear, to grieve without the burden of being Robert Plant, the rock god. While Plant's world crumbled, Page's response was chillingly detached. He couldn't understand why Plant would consider stepping away. To Page, Led Zeppelin wasn't just a band, it was his legacy, his kingdom, and nothing, not even grief, should interfere with that. His insistence that the show must go on felt inhuman. Plant never forgot that coldness. It shattered whatever trust remained between them. In his darkest moments, Plant realized Zeppelin had never really been his. It belonged to Page. And now, in his grief, it was painfully clear that he was merely a pawn in Page's obsessive quest for musical immortality. The resentment festered. For the first time, Plant didn't just want out, he wanted to burn it all down. While Plant mourned, Page spiraled deeper into his own darkness. The man who once commanded every note of Led Zeppelin's sound was now losing control of himself and of the band. His heroin addiction became undeniable. Rehearsals were a gamble. Some nights, he was brilliant, a guitar god bending sound to his will. Other nights, he was a shell barely able to stand, lost in a haze of drugs and exhaustion. The band never knew which Page they'd get. Fans whispered of his decline, as the energy that once electrified arenas dimmed under the weight of addiction. But it wasn't just the drugs that distanced Page from the band. His obsession with the occult deepened. What once seemed like quirky curiosity had turned into a consuming fascination. He surrounded himself with esoteric texts and dark rituals. His purchase of Aleister Crowley's infamous Boleskine house added fuel to rumors, whispers of black magic, eerie energies, and bizarre ceremonies. Some bandmates brushed it off. But others, especially Plant, were disturbed. Spiritually grounded, Plant grew increasingly uneasy. Was Page cultivating a persona, or was there something darker behind the veil? The band was no longer just about music. It had become a battle for power, for control, and for something far more sinister. And Plant wanted out. Jimmy Page's infamous fascination with the occult became even more intense in the late 1970s. He had already purchased Aleister Crowley's notorious Boleskine house, a mansion steeped in dark history and eerie rumors. Whispers of bizarre rituals, black magic, and sinister energy surrounded him. Robert Plant, who had always been more spiritually grounded, found himself increasingly disturbed by Page's obsessions. Led Zeppelin was no longer just about music, it had become a theater of power, control, and something far more unsettling. Plant wanted out. By the early 1980s, the rift between the two men was irreparable. When drummer John Bonham tragically died in 1980, the band dissolved, but it wasn't a clean break. Page, desperate to keep the legacy alive, longed to revive Led Zeppelin in any form. But for Plant, the dream had long since curdled into a nightmare. He had no desire to be shackled to Page's endless nostalgia, no interest in being dragged back into the chaos. Page tried again and again to pull him back, reunion proposals, comeback tours, cryptic hints at reviving the magic, but Plant refused. He was tired. Tired of being overshadowed. Tired of the dysfunction. Tired of being a ghost trapped in the ruins of a once mighty empire. He yearned for his own voice, his own story, something apart from Led Zeppelin's heavy legacy. And that refusal, for Page, was the ultimate betrayal. For Plant, it was survival. One man clung to the past. The other ran from it, leaving behind a band that had once ruled the world but had slowly destroyed itself from within. But Page's conflicts didn't end with Plant. The turbulence in his life extended far beyond their strained partnership. Over the years, he clashed with bandmates, fellow musicians, and even those closest to him, leaving behind a trail of broken relationships and unresolved resentment. John Paul Jones, the band's quiet but essential backbone, spent years in the shadows while Page and Plant soaked up the spotlight. His contributions were often overlooked, his voice silenced, and the resentment festered. When Page and Plant reunited in the 1990s, they didn't even invite Jones, an exclusion that felt like a final insult. For Jones, it wasn't just hurtful, it was betrayal. Page's difficult nature continued into the 2000s when a promising collaboration with the Black Crowes fell apart. Used to being the uncontested leader, Page clashed with the band, his need for control suffocating any creative freedom. The partnership collapsed, leaving yet another failed chapter in his career. Legal battles over Led Zeppelin's legacy also haunted Page. Accusations of plagiarism surfaced, with lawsuits claiming that iconic Zeppelin riffs were lifted from obscure artists and repackaged without credit. What was once hailed as musical genius now faced scrutiny and suspicion. Page found himself defending his legacy in courtrooms rather than on stage, his reputation slowly eroding. But perhaps his greatest battle was not with critics or collaborators, it was within. Despite commanding thousands on stage, Page's personal life spiraled into isolation. His obsession with secrecy built walls that even his family couldn't penetrate. Relationships faltered. Addiction deepened. And the man who once bent sound into magic found himself increasingly alone, a ghost of the guitar god he had once been. Today, Led Zeppelin remains one of the most legendary rock bands in history. But the wounds left by its internal struggles never truly healed. Plant and Page may exchange polite words in public, but the past still lingers, unspoken but heavy. For Robert Plant, Led Zeppelin was a chapter, glorious, chaotic, and painful. For Jimmy Page, it was everything. His entire identity remains tethered to it. To the world, they are immortal icons. But behind the curtain, they are simply two men, forever bound by music, conflict, and a shared past that refuses to be forgotten. And now, with Plant finally breaking his silence, the truth of Led Zeppelin's turbulent history is clearer than ever.